Hello, and a very special on a roll welcome to Martin Nurakar, the creator of Goblin Errands, which you can see being played right now on the D8 channel over on TTRPG Trials, and the creative mind behind Sharkbomb Studios. Martin, thank you for joining us here in our studio.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. For anyone who mightn't know your work, who mightn't know yourself, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about your game design background, the games you've created, how long you've been a gamer, how long you've been a game designer?
All right. So I've been making games since I was 6. I started making like shitty board games, like really roll a dice and move a thing and then draw a card or something. I still have them in a box somewhere. But I'm mainly actually a video game designer. Started my career over 15 years ago. Was employed a bunch. Ended up doing it on my own, being an indie video game designer, which used to be my big main income. And then I ran into a common problem in the creative industries, which is called burnout.
Yes.
And in sort of the recovery phase of that, I sort of discovered TTRPG design as a thing that made me do games again that weren't video games, and ended up making TTRPGs. I've always been really passionate about the medium. I've been playing since I was like 12 years old. So not quite as long as I was making games, but
Mhm.
almost. And I really love TTRPGs, and I've always done like little bits and pieces for them, like little extensions and like my own hacks and that kind of thing. But I never really made finished games, and that sort of happened in this sort of COVID burnout recovery time of like 2020. I started making tabletop role playing games and just had a lot of fun with it, and just kept making more and kept making them into Kickstarters to make print products. And it sort of became a second job in a way, right? It used to be this sort of, oh, let's just make a free thing for fun, and now it's a business in a way, right? But it's still really fun. I still really love role playing games and playing them and making them, and it's wonderful.
It's great to hear, and it's nice when you bring up a good point between video game design and TTRPG design, being able to kind of pivot from one to the other. I wonder, is there anywhere when you come up with a game, do you start often in the same place? Is it different game to game? Is it different medium to medium? Or how do you kind of what's the spark of your creation process when you're making a game?
In the past, it used to be, maybe not as a kid, but like in like my teenage years and as a professional, making games used to be a very cerebral thing, right? I would come up with a problem, I would play a game I'd like and think I could do something similar, and I would just, find the problem and then make the solution. But making the tabletop role playing games, I came at it from a very different angle, and I had a lot of more projects that just came out of me in weird ways, right? I've done a lot of writing just to work through my crisis,
Hmm.
and a lot of projects I just found as I was writing about them. But every project has its own sort of angle that is like, oh, this is interesting, I'm gonna follow that, and that eventually leads me to a game, right?
Mm.
So the I made a game called The Mending Circle, which is a game about witches trying to heal the world one person at a time. And that came, the initial spark for that was, I had like an idea for like 4 attributes that I really liked, because they mapped onto like a psychological concept, and I really enjoyed how that sort of played with each other. And that eventually became very quickly, oh, it's about witches, and then sort of the game came from there. And Goblin Errands, on the other hand, came from reading, um, what's it called? I'm forgetting the name. There's a game about hobbits, where you play hobbits doing little things, like you don't go on adventures, but catch the escape goat from your neighbor, and like, right,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
plan the harvest festival. So it's about very small, gentle things, and I like the idea of it, and I read it, and I didn't play it, but I had fun with the idea, and I was tweeting with the designer of it. And then I had this shitpost idea of, hey, what if you're not the nice little guys in the thing, but you're like the angry goose game. You're
Yeah.
the goblins pranking people. And that was the sort of shitpost tweet that started the idea of, oh, I could make a game about goblins. And it didn't go the sort of pranking way. It
Mhm.
As I was sort of diving into the idea of goblins, and like, goblins have always been very near and dear to my heart. I don't know why. I do know why. It's written in the book. Um, but it sort of morphed there, like from the initial funny, okay, you're like these nasty creatures making everything difficult for everybody. It sort of morphed into, okay, I have a lot of love for these little guys. What's their deal, right? What's their problem? What how can I make that happen? And that's sort of where Goblin Errands came from, right? So every project has its own sort of spark where I go, oh, this is interesting. I want to follow this, and if it ends up being a game, somewhere on the way of me following it, I'll find the game that it is, right? Sometimes I find nothing, or I go like, it isn't interesting enough, or I don't know where this goes, or I don't want to go where this goes. Right?
Is there any tip you'd give to players picking up and running Goblin Errands for the first time?
It's always tricky. I think Goblin Errands as a game really wants you to improvise, right? It comes from my own ethos as a GM, which is I usually play very low prep kind of games because my energy to prep is generally very limited, and I have a lot more fun of keeping when I keep things free and loose and just give players more room to add their craziness to it, and then me picking it up and bringing it somewhere, and that sort of back and forth to me is the best thing about role-playing games, right, for me. And I think if anybody's gonna run Goblin Errands, trying to bring that attitude to like, hey, I don't know where this goes, we'll just make it up as we go, which means you have to bring some level of comfort in your own abilities. And I think the game works even if you don't, but I feel like it works best if you do that, right?
Yeah, I think that answers, I think we had a question from one of the players, and they talked about, so the way TTRPG Trials works is, the first episode of first stream is usually just looking at the system, and then they play through it, and then they do a little review. And in that initial step in, they were wondering, is it more mechanics focused or more role play focused? And I think you've answered that it's it's definitely a little bit more role play and more improv focused as a system. But if there is a mechanic within the game that you're particularly proud of, is there anything that you're like, oh, I really like when players come across this a little bit, they're gonna have a lot of fun?
In terms of rules I like, there's probably too many. I'll try and pick only a few.
Yeah.
One thing I really, really like is, because it's a game about goblins being a community, it's a dice pool system where you count successes. And often in role-playing games, you have this situation where all characters have to do something together, but they have different levels of capability in it, right? Yeah. Oh, we all gotta evade the guards, and one guy's in big armor and he's loud and it's terrible. So there's a mechanic where everybody rolls their dice, but if somebody has more than one success, they can share the successes with others, right? This is the idea of like, oh, I can help my friends, right? Even if you're not really good at this, because I'm so good at it, I can compensate for your lack of skill. And I really love that, because it sort of brings the goblins together. And then there's the mechanic of the stumble, where like if you roll a 4 on your dice, it's not a success, but it could be a success if you're willing to take on a complication, right?
Yeah.
And giving stumbles to other players is so much fun, right? So like, this is an almost success, you can have it, but you'll also have to come up with a complication, right?
Right.
And I love that, because it's this wholesomeness of the goblins working together, but it's also the chaos that means, right?
That's inherent in that mechanic is pure kind of goblin energy, in the sense that I can already see in a game where it's like, okay, you're trying to sneak into the castle and you've all decided to go, let's use that armor example. You're sneaking in, but you know that there's going to be a success with a complication, and you see a suit of armor, and because someone's kind of clanked in, it's like, right, the only way to get through this is to hide in this armor. So it's like we all kind of clamber in, and we're all going to play different parts, and then a part of the group success is, the knights come around, it's like, how do we convince them that this was always a haunted corridor? Because goblins would be like, okay, what's the only way out of this thing? So it draws the attention of more drama and more stakes, because if we take I play a lot of wholesome games. Like I quite like Wander Home, where you kind of just, it's conflict free by design. And I think that's actually slightly a misnomer, because I think the conflict exists in that game internally. It's not, you're never going to have a fight. You're going to have, you're going to have internal conflict. And I think that's important, because games without any conflict have no stakes. And without stakes, there's inherently entertaining moments in TTRPGs, and that is usually dice rolls, and usually two forces are coming together. How are they going to interact?
Yeah.
and usually two conflicting sources. And so with Goblin Errands, it's all inherently baked in. You're there to be goblins. Goblins, in their very nature, are slightly chaotic and erratic. And I mean, I think you even have it in the book. Errant goblins doing goblin errands is such a beautiful phrase. I love it. It's just great, and that
Yeah.
sums it up.
I knew really early on that I wanted a mechanic that adds complications to sort of have this, okay, as we go, things just go wrong and it gets chaotic and weird shit happens and right, it compounds and this entire errand sort of goes off the rails in a fun
Yeah.
way, right? And I knew I wanted complications. And an early version of the stumble was when you roll a 4, you get a success, but the GM also gives you a complication, right?
Right.
And in playtesting, that was just so much load on the GM, right? If everybody rolls and there's like 3 stumbles, I need to come up with 3 complications for different people. And now it's the sort of, if you want it, you can get it, but you as the player have to suggest the complication. The GM has to okay it, but it's your job. And that just that suddenly made it work, right? Before it
Yeah.
was a lot of labor for the GM, and now it's this fun, ooh, what could I get? And your players can make suggestions as well, right? And it becomes a much more interesting moment in the game.
I love that, and I love the nuance there, because I'm sure that's coming from experience. I can even put myself in my experience. When you play games, that as the GM, you have to sort of bring the complication. And if there, like you say, if there's 3, it's usually like, okay, here's a really imaginative one. Here's kind of fine, and you trip over your shoelaces because you're just kind of like, I don't know what to do with too many. Whereas when it's players, and especially when it's 3, I can see how around the table it's like, okay, well, this is going to happen to me. And almost like a Rube Goldberg machine, the next Goblin complication can be, oh, if that's happening to you, I'm going to slip, I'm going to do this thing here. And then it all becomes one big catastrophe,
Yeah.
which again taps into that lovely feeling of, we get around these tables to play games with friends and to create stories, to kind of create something from nothing. And that's the magic of them. You start with, some snacks on the table and a couple of drinks and some dice, and you end with something that, like, at least according to science, or like a little bit of science that I've read, we genuinely feel happiness to us. Our brains don't kind of know the difference sometimes between like what we invent and the adventures we tell. With that in mind, and dipping into, I'm looking through here, some questions that we can bounce into. One of the questions, and I think you were in the chat for TTRPG Trials when they were kind of dipping their toe in, and you mentioned that it was a play, Goblin Errands is a play on, is it Knight Errant? And one of the players was wondering if you're interested in medieval happenings, or what was the influence here.
I think that was just a fun wordplay I found. I wasn't specifically looking at like medieval culture to influence Goblin Errands, because they exist in this weird space where like there's a setting generator in the book, and most of the results are like an orc fortress, an underground dwarven mine, a bustling frontier town, and 20 is New York, right? So, and it's one of people's favorites results because it makes a lot of sense, right? And so these goblins exist mostly in a fantasy space, but not really. So I wasn't really looking at like historical elements. I was more inspired by the practice where like journeymen in a trade here, carpenters in Germany, where I'm from, sometimes it's an old thing, but people still do it, where they travel the country, right? And they work for other carpenters and they get basically lodging and food, but don't get paid, I think. I'm not really keen on the rules. I'm not really sure on the rules, but it's an interesting practice of like leaving your home and going around. And I like the idea of when you're playing the game, you're playing goblins that are also new to the space you're playing in, right? Yes. So you don't have to know everything. You don't know, need to be familiar with everything. You can discover it and play, and it still makes sense, right?
Everything is like, you're quite particular about how to build chaos, and it's a difficult thing to bake in, and I think you should be really proud of how you've done that. It's a wonderful. There's a lot of care and thought, and one of the players, and this is their words, so I would never say this, but they say goblins are normally played off as dumb and gross. I disagree. I don't think goblins are dumb and gross, but they admit that they don't necessarily get the vibe from this game, not in a negative way. And they were wondering what drove you to write more sort of positive goblin stories, assuming they're interpreting kind of the intention there correctly.
Yeah, I mean, that is very correct, right? We have the traditional fantasy game Goblin is the probably the D&D goblin, and that's a mindless, unintelligent thing you kill for XP, right? That's the original one that they sort of pulled out of a lot of, I guess, folklore and other media and wherever they cobbled it together. It has changed, right? If you look at like TTRPGs now, a lot of people enjoy the idea of playing a goblin, and there's a wide range of what's a goblin, what does a goblin mean, and the goblins I wanted to present in Goblin Errands they're a little gross, right? And they're a little weird, but they're not monsters, right? They're people. They're just little guys, and there's this term I think that I've used somewhere where they're small people living in a world built by and for large people, right? Tall persons, and they're this idea, I think, is sort of what resonates with a lot of people. The idea of like being like goblins are perpetual underdogs, right?
Yeah.
They're never the big guy in charge. They just, even if they were, they wouldn't want to be, right? They're not, at least for me, like goblins aren't interested in like wielding power and building monuments or whatever. They're much more in the moment and in the whatever's happening now. And I don't know, that's I think it's sort of the fact that I identify with the goblins and that they're very near and dear to my heart that just colored the perspective I have on them, right? I started out with this idea of, okay, they're like the terrible goose. They're just pranking and being like a little nasty. Still fun, but like, a pest. And it moved into this, okay, they're a community on the margins. They have problems and they're trying to solve them. They're trying to work together, right? It's a very, I feel like it's a very community-focused game, right? This is about goblins coming together to help each other. One of the things I like one of the lines I like the most in the book is that sometimes these goblin communities contain other outsiders, like honorary goblins, which might be animals or people or whatever, right? And I like this inclusiveness, this sort of, okay, we're everybody can be a goblin, right?
I love that. It's something that's really clear in this. There are other TTRPG systems out there where it's like, hey, the twist is you get to play the monster, but I always get the feeling that the designer isn't on the monster side. It's like, and this one is kind of like your care and love for goblins is quite clear, and I think that brings a richer, more fulfilling roleplay experience. One of the other players was wondering if you'd recommend this game for beginner role players, or if
absolutely not. I have actually during playtesting played a few games with people that had never played role-playing games before, and it worked surprisingly well. I didn't expect it to work this well. I think part of the reason is that it worked really well because it has very simple rules, right? It has fun character types where you can go like, oh, this is interesting. I want to play this or that. Shout out there to the Nibbler, which is probably the general most favorite one, which is the goblin that eats things to absorb some of their elements. It's basically if Kirby was a goblin.
Nice.
That's a big favorite. Yeah, so I think one of the things that also help Goblin Errands be really good for beginners is the fact that it's a really silly premise, right? We're little guys in a world that's not built for us, and we're trying to help our community, but everything's going to go wrong. And the silliness is a really good way to creativity, because one of the big sort of barriers to creativity is people's inner critic. The idea of, people are going to judge this. This is not going to be good enough. Nobody's going to like this, right? This is what keeps us back. And silliness is a really good antidote, because even if it's a stupid idea, it's going to get a laugh, and that's going to be fine, right? This encourages us to just be more playful. And I think that's a really good attitude to have. So I think that helps people who have some trouble, right, stepping outside themselves to just have fun with it. If everybody's laughing, I'll come up with something stupid, right?
You've created Goblin Errands, but it's not the only game you've created. There's a back catalog of which there'll be links in the chat, and there'll be links under this video as well that I highly recommend you check it out. If Martin has displayed anything, it's this love of great creativity and game design, and it exists in all your work. But there is, you have a new game coming out, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it, and how similar or how different do you think the vibes are to Goblin Errands?
It's actually not a new game. It's an old game getting a second edition and a
Oh,
print
nice.
version, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually the first game I made, the first tabletop role-playing game I made and sort of published. And it was sort of part of the thing that started this whole process because people responded really well to it. And it's called Ex Novo, and I call it a playable city generator. So you play, and as you play, you draw a map, and you play by yourself or with friends, and you draw the map of a city, and you discover its history, and put on tokens, and things come and go and move, and at the end you end up with an interesting city, with the idea that, okay, now you could play a role-playing game here, right? Now you could set a story here, you get some texture of history and of factions and resources and power, that generates interesting setups. And it feels very different from Goblin Errands because it's a much more serious, creative endeavor, right? It wants you to take it serious. You can be silly with it, but it's much more meant to be used for something you're going to do something with, right? You can just play it for fun as well. But I think it breaks down more than Goblin Errands if you're silly with it, right? It just gets chaotic and starts losing the thing that holds it together. And it feels very different, but at the same time, it's also a game that's very much about creativity, which I think Goblin Errands is as well, right? The idea of, okay, players have to come up with their consequences. And in a lot of cases, as a goblin, you'll find problems you cannot solve because you cannot open the door. How do you open the door? You're just not tall enough to reach the doorknob, right? And I think I love games where that's the case, right? Where the players are encouraged to bring as much of themselves or their ideas into the world or the story.
There's something sort of magical and a little bit crazy about a group of people collectively being on the same page, and that's just a wonderful feeling. And
it's just fucking magic,
isn't it? Like, it's the best. It's so good, and it's why I think, like, when you first get that, when you first get a taste of TTRPGs, you're like, okay, this is now I'm going to never stop playing this.
Can I do another shout out?
Oh yeah, of course.
Another one of my projects, because I just said the word grace, and it reminds me of a game I made that nobody knows about and that I deeply love because it's a weird thing. Can I don't know if you can squeeze it in there. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry.
So a game I'm deeply proud of, which is almost not a game, it's called Impossible Swan, which is this ideal of perfect grace that is impossible because nobody can have perfect grace, right? And it's a sort of meditation, mindfulness, self-check-in game that has like specific triggers where you gotta, go into yourself and figure out things. And I feel like I'm the only person playing because it's weird and strange, but I wanted to shout it out because I love it, and I just got reminded of it because it said grace.
Apart from the games you've made, do you have a favorite TTRPG system? Or, I know that's a tough question, is there one at the moment that you're like, okay, this is my vibe for a while?
It's a good question. I think if I had to put out like an all-time favorite, it's probably Exalted, because I really, really, really love the world building and lore. It's so unique and so dense and so weird in places that I'd really, really, really like it. I don't enjoy the system anymore. I'm not playing it because the system's terrible. I tried to make a hack years ago. But that, in terms of lore and like setting, that one's really, really near and dear to my heart. Other than that, I think the favorite role-playing game shifts very much. It's just what I'm interested in at the moment. Currently, I've never really gone there, but I'm now starting a campaign in like OSR, and like it's a very different ethos of playing than I usually do, right? Usually it's very, very improvised, and this is much more, sandbox and dungeons and hex scrolls. And I've really fell into it because I found DURF, DURF, which is an OSR rule set that's just very nice. It just feels, from reading it, I was just really, I want to play this. This is like, everything is like really nicely put together. There's not a lot of chaos around it. So I'm excited about that. I'm actually going to have my first session on that tonight. So
that's nice.
Going to be cool.
Amazing. Well, this won't help you get into the mindset for that. But just to close out our interview, I've put together what I've called a Goblin lightning round. So I'm going to ask you kind of would you rather or this or that questions, including a little fuck, marry, kill at the end, if that's okay. But to do it, I think it's only fair that I goblin myself up. So, welcome to the Goblin Round. Here we go. Question number 1. Would you rather only eat with a rusty fork or only eat rusty forks?
Only eat with a rusty rustic fork, rusted fork.
A rusty fork. Yeah, actually, the internet and the delay won't help with this, but that's okay. Would you rather a spider whisper in your ear or French kiss a slug?
I'll take the spider.
Yeah, nice. Me too. Would you rather listen to polka, ska, or defiant jazz?
I don't know what Defiant Jazz is, and I think ska is the most fun, energetic one of them, so I'll pick that.
Nice. Crunchy or chunky?
Crunchy for sure.
And then fuck, marry, kill, goblins, kobolds, and imps.
Ooh, probably kill imps because they're too dangerous and too mischievous. They'll just burn down your house when you're not looking.
Mm-hmm.
I guess marry goblins because I'm just married to them already, and that just leaves fucking kobolds.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, sweet. That's the end of my little lightning round. Martin, thank you so much for joining us for
Thank
this
you
chat.
for having me.
Is there anything you'd like to? There's the Kickstarter for late pledges for the next kind of supplement for Ex Noble. Is there anything else? Where can people find you? What's the step that people should take immediately? Do not hesitate. Go straight away. Open up that second tab and do what Martin's about to tell you.
It's probably BlueSky or Discord. I have a Discord for the Sharkbomb Studios games, so if you want to chat about any of the games, I'm there most of the time. And BlueSky, I'm also kind of active. So if you want to reach out and talk to me, that's probably the best way, A, to reach me, and B, to be up to date when anything new happens.
Nice, yeah. Go follow Martin over on BlueSky, join the Discord, chat about games, and once again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll head back to the studio.